Something happened at Skinwalker Ranch that nobody is talking about. The cameras stopped rolling. Experiments that had been running for months were suddenly halted. Crew schedules were wiped clean, and the silence that followed wasn't the comfortable quiet of a production break. It was the heavy silence of something gone terribly wrong. The timeline is crucial to understanding what happened. In late spring of last year, production was in full swing. The team had scheduled a series of experiments designed to test a hypothesis they'd been developing over multiple seasons, that specific locations on the ranch responded to electromagnetic stimulation in ways that suggested intelligence or at least complex reactive systems. Camera crews were on site daily. Travis Taylor and the scientific team were running constant tests. Eric Bard was analyzing data streams in real time. Dragon, the ranch's security chief, was monitoring the perimeter. Everything was normal. Then, on a Tuesday afternoon in early June, everything changed. Filming stopped mid-experiment. Not paused, stopped. Equipment was powered down, the crew was sent home, and the official explanation was deliberately vague, technical difficulties requiring assessment. But here's what made people suspicious. Production crews know the difference between a normal pause and an emergency shutdown. In normal circumstances, you finish the day's shoot, wrap equipment properly, schedule the next session. This was different. Sources close to the production describe it as abrupt. One moment cameras were rolling, the next everyone was being asked to leave immediately. Experiments that had taken weeks to set up were abandoned mid-process. The crew schedules tell the story. Up until that Tuesday, every day for the following month was blocked for filming. By Wednesday morning, those schedules were completely cleared. No explanations, no new dates, just blank calendars and a memo about indefinite postponement pending further review. People who'd worked in television production for decades said they'd never seen anything quite like it. The speed, the totality, the lack of communication. Perhaps most telling was the simultaneous silence from everyone involved. Travis Taylor, who regularly engaged with fans on social media, went quiet about ranch activities. Brandon Fugel, the ranch's owner who'd been open about experiments, stopped discussing current investigations. Crew members who used to share behind-the-scenes photos suddenly posted nothing from the ranch. It was coordinated, deliberate, the kind of silence that comes with NDAS and serious legal implications. This wasn't planned downtime. Production breaks are announced. Seasonal gaps are expected. This was something else entirely. A full stop in the middle of active investigation, leaving equipment in place and experiments unfinished. Whatever happened that Tuesday didn't just pause the show. It changed the entire trajectory of how the ranch would be investigated going forward. The experiment that preceded the shutdown was relatively routine by Skinwalker Ranch standards. The team was conducting electromagnetic testing in an area known for high strangeness, using a combination of RF spectrum analyzers, magnetometers, and high-speed cameras. They'd done similar tests dozens of times. This should have been unremarkable. What made this different was the consistency of the anomaly. In past experiments, strange readings would appear briefly, spike, then disappear. Interesting, but inconclusive. This time, multiple instruments detected the same phenomenon simultaneously, not just one sensor malfunctioning or picking up interference. Every piece of equipment, calibrated independently, registered identical anomalies at precisely the same time. According to sources familiar with the data, the readings didn't match any known category. It wasn't standard electromagnetic interference from power lines or radio towers. The signature was completely different. It wasn't geological activity. Seismographs showed no corresponding movement. It wasn't atmospheric. Weather conditions were stable. And it wasn't equipment failure, because once they swapped in backup instruments, the readings continued unchanged. But here's what really disturbed the team. The anomaly had structure. It wasn't random noise or chaotic signals. It showed patterns. Repetition, sequences that suggested organization. One researcher, speaking anonymously, described it as looking less like natural phenomena and more like data transmission, as if something was broadcasting on frequencies they happened to be monitoring. The data was concerning because it didn't fit into comfortable categories. UAPs can be explained away as misidentified aircraft or atmospheric phenomena. Geological anomalies can be attributed to unique mineral compositions or underground structures. Electromagnetic interference can be blamed on equipment or distant sources, but data showing clear structure, perfect synchronization across multiple independent systems, and patterns that suggested intentional organization, that was something different entirely. This wasn't interesting data that would make for a compelling episode. This was concerning data that made scientists stop and reconsider whether they should be conducting these experiments at all. Because if something was responding to their tests, if something was broadcasting back, then the fundamental assumption underlying the investigation was wrong. They weren't just observing passive phenomena. They were interacting with something active. The data review session that followed the experiment revealed something that shouldn't have been possible. Conflicting readings that violated basic physics were appearing simultaneously. Instruments detecting electromagnetic fields in ranges that should have required massive power sources, yet thermal imaging showed no heat signatures. Radiation detectors registering particles that left no trace on film or digital sensors. Audio equipment picking up frequencies below human hearing range, but sound pressure meters showing no corresponding waves. Scientists on the team started using a term they'd avoided throughout the entire investigation: impossible. Not unlikely, not unexplained, impossible, because the data sets were mutually exclusive. If instrument A was correct, instrument B's readings couldn't exist. If instrument B was functioning properly, instrument A's data violated known laws. Yet both were calibrated correctly, both were functioning as designed, and both were recording contradictory realities. Then came the detail that made everyone stop talking and start genuinely worrying. The signals didn't stop when they shut down the equipment. Standard protocol after capturing interesting data is to power everything down, verify the anomaly disappears, then power back up to see if it returns. This helps eliminate the possibility that your own equipment is creating the phenomena you're trying to measure. They shut down every piece of electronic equipment on the ranch. Generators, computers, sensors, everything. The baseline readings should have dropped to near zero. Instead, the signal persisted. Not as strong, but definitely present, which meant whatever they were detecting existed independent of their observation. It was there whether they were measuring it or not. And somehow, impossibly, their instruments were still detecting it even when powered off. But the truly disturbing realization came when they analyzed the pattern over time. The signal wasn't random, it wasn't consistent, it was adaptive. During the first hour of testing, it appeared in one frequency range. When they focused their instruments on that range, it shifted to another. When they broadened their monitoring, it split across multiple frequencies. It was as if something was testing their capabilities, learning what they could detect, adjusting its behavior accordingly. This crossed a fundamental line in scientific investigation. You can study phenomena that don't understand they're being studied. Weather doesn't know you're measuring it. Geological formations don't care about your seismographs. But if something is responding to observation, if it's adjusting behavior based on how you're measuring it, then you're not conducting passive research anymore. You're engaged in an interaction, and interactions can go both ways. Before this experiment, safety concerns at Skinwalker Ranch focused on practical matters. Don't stand under the drilling rig. Wear protective equipment during rocket launches. Maintain safe distances from high-powered laser and RF equipment. Standard industrial safety protocols for the kind of testing they were conducting. But after this data came back, the conversation about safety changed fundamentally. Medical monitoring of team members had been routine throughout the investigation. Blood work, basic physicals, standard stuff to ensure nothing on the ranch was causing obvious health problems. But in the days following this particular experiment, several team members reported symptoms that couldn't be easily explained. Severe headaches that lasted for days, sleep disruption, vivid dreams that multiple people described in eerily similar terms, a general sense of unease that persisted even after leaving the property. One researcher described it as feeling watched, even at home, hundreds of miles from the ranch. Another reported technology malfunctions that started after the experiment. Phones dying randomly, computers crashing, electrical systems in his house behaving strangely. Were these symptoms connected to the experiment, psychosomatic responses to fear, or something else? The team couldn't say with certainty, and that uncertainty was itself concerning. Dr. Travis Taylor, who'd been advocating for increasingly aggressive testing to provoke responses, suddenly started talking about protocols and caution. Sources say he had conversations with Brandon Fugel about whether they were exposing the team to something they didn't understand and couldn't protect against. Not physical danger. You can wear protective gear and maintain safe distances. But psychological or neurological effects that might not show up on standard medical tests. The phrase that kept coming up in internal discussions was informed consent. Everyone on the team had agreed to investigate strange phenomena. They'd signed waivers acknowledging physical risks, but nobody had consented to exposure to something that might affect consciousness or cognition in ways medical science couldn't predict or treat. How do you get informed consent when neither you nor your subjects understand what you're dealing with? This was the moment when the investigation stopped being about discovery and became about exposure, about whether pushing for answers was worth potential harm to the people doing the pushing, and critically, about whether continuing to provoke responses was making things worse. Because if the phenomena could adapt, if it could respond, if it could somehow affect affect people even after they left the property, then every experiment wasn't just gathering data. It was escalating an interaction that nobody fully understood. Anyone who's watched the show closely over multiple seasons can see the shift. Certain locations on the ranch that were featured prominently in early episodes quietly disappeared from later investigations, not because they stopped being interesting, because they became too concerning to continue studying with cameras rolling and crew members present. One area in particular, a section near the East Field, was the focus of intense investigation in the first 2 seasons. High radiation readings, strange lights, equipment malfunctions, classic Skinwalker Ranch phenomena. Then, after a specific incident that was filmed but never aired, that zone was quietly removed from the rotation. Experiments started happening everywhere else on the property. That particular location stopped appearing in episodes. The official explanation, when fans noticed, was simple. They were exploring other areas of the ranch to get more comprehensive data, but people familiar with the production tell a different story. After the incident, a decision was made at the highest levels that this area would be monitored remotely only. No personnel on site during active phenomena, no film crews. The zone wasn't abandoned because it was uninteresting. It was cordoned off because it was too active. What makes avoidance revealing is context. Throughout the show's run, the team has deliberately put themselves in uncomfortable situations, flying helicopters in areas known for equipment failure, digging in zones with radiation concerns, conducting experiments that they knew might trigger reactions. These aren't people who scare easily or avoid risk, so when they collectively decide that a location is off limits for direct investigation, it tells you something significant happened there. Sources describe the incident that led to the decision as a near miss, not physical danger in the traditional sense. No one was injured, but something happened during filming that made everyone present extremely uncomfortable. Multiple crew members refused to return to that specific area. Insurance concerns were raised, and Brandon Fugel made the call that whatever data they might gather wasn't worth the risk to personnel. The lesson here is important. Some areas aren't off limits because they're empty or explained away. They're restricted because they're too full of activity that nobody wants to interact with up close anymore. Observation from a distance is one thing. Direct exposure is something else entirely, and the decision to maintain distance after years of aggressive investigation speaks volumes about what they experienced in that zone. One of the strangest aspects of the shutdown involves the delayed reaction to footage. During filming, everyone on site was focused on equipment, data streams, and immediate observations. The atmosphere was professional, scientific, controlled. Yes, strange things happened, but in the moment, with cameras rolling and a job to do, people stayed focused on documentation. The unease came later, during the review sessions when editors started going through raw footage frame by frame, when producers watched everything that had been captured without the distraction of being on site. That's when people started seeing things that nobody noticed during actual filming. Details in the background, patterns in the data visualizations, sequences that didn't make sense when viewed in isolation but became disturbing when seen in context. One editor described the experience as watching something change the longer you looked at it. He'd review a segment, mark it for inclusion, then come back to it hours later and see something different. Not literally different, the footage hadn't changed, but his perception of what was happening in the frame had shifted. Details that seemed insignificant during the first viewing became prominent. Patterns emerged that he couldn't unsee once noticed. Multiple crew members reported that reviewing footage affected them more than being on the ranch during filming, which doesn't make logical sense. You'd think direct exposure would be more impactful than watching recorded video in a comfortable editing bay. But the repeated viewing, the ability to pause and examine frames, the process of trying to understand what they'd captured, that's what got under people's skin. Then came the reports from people who worked on the footage off-site, away from the ranch entirely. Editors in Los Angeles, color correction specialists in New York, sound designers who never set foot in Utah. They started reporting strange experiences, dreams about the ranch, a sense of being observed while working on specific segments, technology problems that seemed concentrated around footage from particular experiments. This is where things get genuinely unsettling. If phenomena could somehow extend beyond the physical location through recorded media, then documentation wasn't a safe distance observation anymore. It was a vector. Every copy of the footage, every hard drive, every review session, potentially extending whatever was happening at the ranch to people who'd never been there. The real shock didn't come from being present during the experiments. It came from trying to understand what had been captured afterward. Networks shut down productions for predictable reasons. Budget overruns, declining ratings, cast conflicts, safety violations, standard entertainment industry issues that happen all the time and get resolved through normal business processes. What happened with Skinwalker Ranch wasn't any of those things. The show was profitable, ratings were strong, the team worked worked well together. By every conventional metric, production should have continued. But there's a difference between a ratings problem and a liability problem. Ratings can be fixed with better marketing or format changes. Liability issues, especially ones involving crew health and safety, require immediate action and careful legal review. When multiple people start reporting psychological effects, when medical concerns arise, when insurance companies start asking questions, that's when network executives get involved directly. Sources within the network describe a series of high-level meetings that happened in the days following the shutdown. Legal teams were consulted, insurance carriers were notified, medical professionals were brought in to evaluate crew members. This wasn't creative executives discussing storylines. This was risk management trying to understand potential exposure and liability. The decision to pause production came from above the show's production team. Brandon Fugel owns the ranch and could have continued private investigations. The core team wanted to keep working. But when a network's corporate structure gets involved, when lawyers start reviewing what happened rather than producers, that signals a fundamental shift from entertainment concerns to legal and safety concerns. What makes this shutdown different from past controversies or production problems is the speed and completeness. Past issues with paranormal shows have led to format changes or cast replacements. This led to a full stop. No announcements about retooling, no statements about when filming might resume, just vague mentions of technical issues and ongoing assessment, the kind of corporate language that indicates serious concerns being discussed privately while public statements remain deliberately uninformative. Someone higher up decided this shouldn't continue, at least not in its current form. Whether that decision was driven by genuine concern for crew safety, fear of legal liability, or something else entirely, we may never know. But the fact that it happened, that a successful show with strong ratings was shut down mid-season without clear explanation, tells you everything about how seriously this situation was taken at the highest corporate levels. Every reality show captures far more footage than ever makes it to air. For every hour of television, you might shoot 30 or 40 hours of raw material. Most of what gets cut is boring. Equipment setup, failed takes, conversations that don't advance the narrative. But sometimes footage gets cut for other reasons. Because it doesn't fit the show's format, because it raises questions the producers can't answer, because it's too ambiguous to include but too clear to completely dismiss. Skinwalker Ranch has an archive of footage that was never meant to be aired, experiments that produced results too strange to contextualize in a television format, moments where equipment behaved in ways that suggested either massive technical failure or phenomena beyond current explanation, crew reactions that were too genuine, too unsettled to fit the show's somewhat measured scientific tone. One particular piece of footage, described by multiple sources but never publicly released, shows an experiment where everything went wrong at once. Multiple equipment failures, data streams contradicting each other in real time, and in the background, something visible on thermal cameras that shouldn't have been there. Not a person, not an animal, something that registered heat in patterns that didn't match any known biological signature. The footage was reviewed extensively, enhanced, analyzed by multiple experts. The consensus was that it showed something real, something physical enough to register on multiple sensors, but what it showed couldn't be easily explained. It wasn't clear enough to definitively prove anything extraordinary, but it was too clear to dismiss as equipment malfunction or misidentification. It existed in the uncomfortable middle ground where debunking fails but proof remains elusive. The decision was made to keep this footage in the vault, not because it was boring or irrelevant, because silence can be a form of containment. If you can't explain something and you can't debunk it, sometimes the safest option is to not show it at all. Let people speculate about what might have been captured rather than giving them actual footage that raises more questions than it answers. This is where the shutdown becomes most interesting from a disclosure perspective. Everything that aired on the show was carefully curated to be compelling but ultimately explainable within the show's framework. Mysterious but not definitively proven. The footage that never aired, that sits in archives under legal protection and non-disclosure agreements, that might tell a very different story. Not everything is debunked by science and skepticism. Some things are simply buried because they don't fit into comfortable narratives about what's possible. The question everyone asks is whether the ranch is still active without cameras, whether experiments continue privately, whether the phenomena that made Skinwalker Ranch famous persist when nobody is watching or documenting. The answer, based on everything we can piece together, is yes. Activity continues, investigation continues, but the nature of how it's being studied has fundamentally changed. Brandon Fugal has made it clear the ranch remains a focus of serious scientific investigation, but that investigation is happening differently now. More remote monitoring, more automated data collection, less direct human presence during active phenomena. The shift suggests lessons learned from whatever led to the shutdown. That proximity to certain events carries risks that can be mitigated through distance and technological intermediation. The patterns observed over years of investigation suggest that whatever happens at Skinwalker Ranch doesn't depend on human observation. The phenomena existed before the show. They'll exist after. Cameras and scientific instruments might make the events visible and documentable, but they don't create them, which raises an uncomfortable question. If filming stops but activity continues, what was the investigation actually accomplishing besides documentation? Some researchers argue that aggressive investigation, deliberately provoking responses, attempting to trigger phenomena through experimentation, might have escalated whatever exists there. That each rocket launch, each drilling operation, each electromagnetic pulse wasn't just observing passive phenomena, but actively engaging with something responsive, and that engagement potentially made things worse. The shutdown might represent a recognition that the paradigm was wrong. You can't treat intelligent, responsive phenomena like laboratory subjects. You can't provoke and measure something that might be measuring you back. The scientific method works beautifully for studying things that don't know they're being studied. It becomes problematic when the subject of investigation is aware of the observer and potentially capable of responding in ways that affect the observer. Looking forward, Skinwalker Ranch will likely remain an active research site, but the research will be more cautious, more respectful of boundaries that weren't clear until they were crossed, less focused on making compelling television, and more concerned with understanding phenomena without unnecessarily escalating interaction. Because the ultimate lesson of the shutdown is simple. Stopping observation doesn't stop activity, but it might stop whatever consequences come from aggressive investigation of things we don't yet understand.
The lead investigator at Skinwalker Ranch has just quit.
What we captured on those cameras wasn't just unexplained. It was aware. It knew we were there. It knew where every camera was positioned. With that being said, I am leaving Skinwalker Ranch.
Dr. Travis Taylor, one of the most credentialed scientists in America, multiple doctorates, decades working on classified government projects, the lead investigator at Skinwalker Ranch, has just quit after viewing footage that showed something so disturbing, so unexplainable, that he walked away from the most mysterious location on Earth. And Brandon Fugal's response is raising even more questions than answers.
Dr. Travis S. Taylor holds not one, not two, but multiple advanced degrees from major universities. We're talking about a doctorate in optical science and engineering, a separate doctorate in aerospace systems engineering, a master's degree in physics, a master's degree in astronomy, and a bachelor's degree in electrical engineering. This man has spent his entire adult life studying the most complex and challenging problems in science and engineering. But his credentials go far beyond just academic achievements. Travis has worked extensively for the United States Department of Defense on classified projects that the public will never know the details of. He's consulted for NASA on cutting-edge aerospace programs. He's been involved in developing advanced propulsion systems, weapons technology, and surveillance systems that remain classified to this day. He holds security clearances that grant him access to some of the most sensitive information in the United States government. He's authored over 25 peer-reviewed scientific papers published in major journals. He's written technical documents for government agencies that will never be declassified. He's appeared on legitimate science programs like The Universe and Rocket City Rednecks, where he explained complex physics and engineering concepts to general audiences. His reputation in the scientific and defense communities is stellar. This is not someone who jumps to conclusions or gets easily fooled by ambiguous evidence. When Travis Taylor joined the Skinwalker Ranch investigation team in 2020, it was a game changer for the entire operation. His involvement legitimized the project in the eyes of the broader scientific community. Suddenly, this wasn't just a fringe paranormal investigation. This was a serious scientific endeavor led by someone with the credentials and experience to back up every claim. Travis brought equipment to the ranch that most civilian researchers could only dream of accessing: sophisticated spectrum analyzers, radiation detection systems, electromagnetic field monitors, LiDAR mapping technology, and experimental sensors that aren't even available to the public yet. His approach was methodical, systematic, and deeply skeptical, which is exactly what the investigation needed. So now that you understand who Travis Taylor is and why his departure is so significant, let's talk about what actually happened. According to multiple sources close to the investigation who spoke on condition of anonymity, the incident occurred during a late-night surveillance operation in the Eastfield area of Skinwalker Ranch. Now, for those of you who follow the ranch investigations closely, you know that the Eastfield has been a hotspot for anomalous activity for years. This is the location where the team has documented some of the most intense and frequent unexplained phenomena. We're talking UAP sightings captured on multiple independent camera systems, electromagnetic disturbances powerful enough to cause complete equipment failures, strange animal behavior including cattle absolutely refusing to enter certain areas even when food is present, and multiple instances of human investigators experiencing unexplained physical symptoms ranging from nausea to temporary vision problems. The team had decided to conduct what they called a maximum coverage surveillance operation in this location. The goal was to have every possible sensor, every possible camera, every possible detection system focused on this area simultaneously, so that if anything happened, they would capture it from multiple angles with multiple types of equipment, all timestamp synchronized to the millisecond. The equipment array they deployed was absolutely massive. Infrared cameras positioned at 6 different angles around the perimeter, thermal imaging systems capable of detecting heat signatures from over a mile away, electromagnetic spectrum analyzers monitoring everything from low-frequency radio waves all the way up to gamma radiation, sensitive radiation detectors that could pick up even the slightest particle emissions, motion sensors using both passive infrared and active microwave technology, and high-definition night vision cameras recording at 4K resolution, all feeding data back to the command center in real time. The surveillance operation began at sunset, around 8:30 p.m. Mountain Time. Travis was positioned in the command center, which is located approximately 300 yards from the Eastfield location, monitoring all the feeds on multiple screens. Security personnel were stationed at strategic positions around the perimeter. Everyone was in radio contact. They settled in for what they expected to be a long night of careful observation. And for the first several hours, absolutely nothing unusual occurred. The equipment registered completely normal baseline readings. The electromagnetic spectrum was quiet. No thermal anomalies appeared on the infrared systems, no radiation spikes, no motion detections except for occasional wildlife passing through the area. By Skinwalker Ranch standards, it was an unusually calm and uneventful evening. Some team members were even joking that maybe the phenomena had decided to take the night off. Then, at exactly 2:47 a.m., everything changed in an instant. At 2:47 a.m., every single piece of equipment in the surveillance array registered an anomaly at the exact same moment. And I mean exact, down to the millisecond, according to the timestamp synchronization. The electromagnetic field monitors spiked to levels that should have required a massive power source somewhere in the immediate vicinity, something equivalent to a major electrical substation or a powerful military-grade radio transmitter operating at full capacity. But there was nothing there. No power lines, no vehicles, no equipment that could possibly generate that kind of electromagnetic signature. The radiation detectors surged beyond their safe operating parameters so dramatically that the systems automatically shut down to prevent damage to the sensitive instruments. The thermal imaging cameras detected a massive heat signature that didn't correspond to any known animal, any vehicle, any natural phenomenon that the team had ever documented. And the night vision cameras captured something that, according to those who have seen the footage, defies any conventional explanation. One source close to the investigation, speaking on condition of anonymity because they're not authorized to discuss the details publicly, described the footage as showing a structured object that appeared to materialize out of thin air, completely solid and three-dimensional, that hovered in a completely stationary position for approximately 30 seconds without any visible means of propulsion, support, or attachment to anything, and then dematerialized in a way that violated multiple fundamental laws of physics as we currently understand them. The object wasn't blurry, it wasn't ambiguous. It wasn't some distant light that could be explained as an aircraft or satellite. According to the descriptions, this was a solid, structured object, clearly visible on multiple camera systems simultaneously, with defined edges and what appeared to be a metallic or highly reflective surface. But here's where the incident takes an even stranger turn. What allegedly disturbed Travis the most, what ultimately became the breaking point that led to his decision to leave the project entirely, wasn't even the object itself. It was what happened immediately after the object vanished from view. The cameras captured what appeared to be a humanoid figure standing in the exact location where the object had been hovering just seconds before. And this figure didn't walk into frame from the darkness. It didn't approach from any direction that the motion sensors would have detected. It was simply there, instantly present, as if it had been deposited or left behind by whatever had just disappeared. The figure stood completely motionless for what witnesses estimate was about 5 to 7 seconds. And then, in what multiple people who've seen the footage described as one of the most unsettling and disturbing moments they've ever experienced, the figure slowly and deliberately turned its head directly toward the camera array, as if it knew exactly where every camera was positioned, as if it was fully aware that it was being watched and recorded. According to the detailed descriptions of the footage from those who have viewed it, the figure's physical proportions were fundamentally wrong in a way that immediately triggered a deep sense of wrongness in anyone watching. It was too tall, standing somewhere between 7 and 8 feet in height. The torso was too narrow, appearing almost skeletal in its proportions, and the limbs, particularly the arms, didn't move the way human limbs move. There was something about the joints, about the way they articulated or failed to articulate properly, that was profoundly disturbing to witness. Then, after those several seconds of standing completely still and staring directly at the cameras with what appeared to be deliberate awareness and intention, the figure began moving toward the camera array. But it wasn't walking, at least not in any way that resembled normal bipedal locomotion. The movement was described as unnaturally smooth and fluid, almost as if the figure was gliding or floating just slightly above the ground surface, covering distance without any visible leg movement, without any of the natural weight shift and balance adjustments that you would expect from any walking creature. Travis, who was monitoring all of the feeds in real time from the command center 300 yards away, immediately grabbed the radio and transmitted an urgent message to the security team positioned near the east field. Evacuate the area immediately. Get away from that location right now. But before any of the security personnel could even respond or acknowledge the transmission, something unprecedented happened. Every single camera in the array went completely dark simultaneously. Not a gradual power failure where systems shut down one by one. Not a signal interruption that might cause flickering or static. Just instant, complete, total black across every single camera system at the exact same moment, as if something had reached out and switched them all off with perfect synchronization. When the full team returned to the East Field area the following morning at first light, they found physical evidence that something extraordinary had occurred in that location. The ground where the figure had been standing, where it had materialized after the object vanished, was scorched in a perfect circular pattern approximately 8 feet in diameter. The grass within this circle was completely burned away, reduced to ash and scattered by the morning breeze. The soil itself appeared to have been subjected to intense heat, fundamentally changed in both texture and color from the surrounding earth. And here's what's truly disturbing. The soil temperature in that circle was still measurably elevated 12 full hours after the incident occurred, registering nearly 15 degrees Fahrenheit higher than the surrounding ground temperature. Whatever had happened there had released or generated enough energy to fundamentally alter the physical properties of the Earth itself. The electromagnetic readings in that exact spot remained anomalous for 3 complete days afterward, displaying bizarre fluctuations and patterns that made absolutely no scientific sense given that there was no power source, no equipment, nothing in that area that could possibly be generating or influencing electromagnetic fields. But here's where the story takes an even more disturbing turn, and this is the detail that I think really explains why Travis made the decision he did. When Travis went back and reviewed the footage frame by frame, analyzing every single frame of video that was captured before the cameras went dark, he noticed something that wasn't visible during the live monitoring, something that only became apparent when you slowed the footage down and examined it with extreme scrutiny. In the final frames before the cameras
was cut out, in the very last images that were captured, the figure appeared to be looking directly at the camera lens with what seemed like intentional focus. And in what appeared to be the reflection of its eyes, assuming they were eyes in any conventional sense, there appeared to be symbols or patterns of some kind. These weren't random shapes or visual artifacts caused by the camera system or compression. They were geometric patterns, precise and deliberate and clearly intentional, that didn't match any known human language, any mathematical notation system, any symbolic representation that Travis could identify despite his extensive education and access to classified databases. Travis spent the next 72 hours essentially locked in the analysis room, barely sleeping, barely eating, completely obsessed with understanding what he had captured. He reviewed every single second of that footage hundreds of times. He ran enhanced images of those symbols through every database he had access to, and given his security clearances, that includes databases that the general public doesn't even know exist. He consulted with colleagues in linguistics, cryptography, theoretical mathematics, symbolic systems analysis, and even reached out to experts in ancient languages and archaeological symbols. Nothing matched. Nothing even came close to providing any kind of framework for understanding what those symbols might represent or mean. And that's when, according to multiple sources who spoke with Travis directly during this period, he experienced what can only be described as a fundamental shift in his understanding of what was happening at Skinwalker Ranch. Up until this point, despite all the strange phenomena he had documented, despite all the unexplained events, Travis had maintained his scientific optimism and his belief that sufficient data and rigorous analysis would eventually reveal rational explanations. But this incident, this particular combination of the object, the figure, the biological effects, and especially those symbols, represented something that Travis could no longer fit into any framework of conventional science or even unconventional theoretical physics. This wasn't just unexplained. This was something that seemed to demonstrate awareness, intention, and purpose. This was something that appeared to be deliberately interacting with the investigation team. One source quoted Travis as saying during this period, "When you're studying a phenomenon in science, there's supposed to be a clear separation between the observer and the observed. You're watching something, measuring something, analyzing something, but you're separate from it. But what happens when that fundamental relationship reverses? What happens when the thing you're trying to study starts studying you back? What happens when it demonstrates not just awareness of your presence, but specific knowledge of your methods, your equipment, your intentions? That's not a phenomenon anymore. That's an intelligence. And that changes everything about how we need to approach this." Travis told colleagues the Eastfield footage suggested deliberate intentionality. The object appeared exactly where the most sensitive equipment was positioned, as if it knew the surveillance array's location. The figure materialized where the object had been, suggesting a clear connection. It moved directly toward the cameras with obvious purpose. Those symbols seemed like a message or warning that the team was exploring forbidden territory. But Travis wasn't just worried about immediate safety. He was concerned about what investigators these phenomena might be unleashing or awakening, a theory developed among team members that Travis came to embrace. Skinwalker Ranch isn't just where strange things happen randomly. It's where dangerous things are deliberately contained. The property might sit on top of something meant to remain undisturbed, a dimensional rift, an ancient structure, or something we can't comprehend. Every sensor deployed, every excavation conducted, might be weakening whatever containment was put in place thousands of years ago. Travis expressed concern that escalating anomalous events weren't random, they were direct responses to investigation. Quote, "What if we're not discovering something dormant? What if we're waking something up?" When news of Travis's departure circulated, everyone wanted Brandon Fugel's response. How did the ranch owner, who's invested millions into studying the property, react to losing his lead investigator? Fugel released an official statement. Dr. Travis Taylor, one of the most credentialed scientists in America, multiple doctorates, decades working on classified government projects, the lead investigator at Skinwalker Ranch, has just quit after viewing footage that showed something so disturbing, so unexplainable, that he walked away from the most mysterious location on Earth. And Brandon Fugel's response is raising even more questions than answers. This isn't just another Skinwalker Ranch story. This is different. What Travis saw on those cameras changed everything. Before we can fully understand the significance of what happened and why Travis's departure is such a massive deal, we need to establish exactly who Dr. Travis Taylor is, because this context is absolutely critical. This isn't some paranormal paranormal enthusiast who got spooked by shadows. This isn't a reality TV personality chasing ratings. This is one of the most legitimately credentialed scientists working in America today. And Brandon Fugel's response is raising even more questions than answers. This isn't just another Skinwalker Ranch story. This is different. What Travis saw on those cameras changed everything. During a laser experiment on Skinwalker Ranch, crew members were physically attacked by an unknown force. Dr. Travis Taylor was thrown backward. Eric Bard collapsed with radiation exposure. Multiple injuries required hospitalization. Medical records confirmed the damage. The footage captured it all. Subscribe for the full investigation into what attacked Brandon Fugel's team. The investigation that would result in the most violent incident in Skinwalker Ranch history began with what seemed like a straightforward scientific experiment designed by Dr. Travis Taylor to test a controversial hypothesis about the anomaly zone above the property. For months, the team had documented strange phenomena occurring in the airspace directly above the mesa: unexplained radar returns, GPS failures, and electromagnetic disturbances that defied conventional explanation. Travis theorized that whatever caused these anomalies might be responsive to specific frequencies of electromagnetic radiation, particularly high-powered laser emissions in the infrared spectrum. Brandon Fugel approved a significant budget expenditure to acquire military-grade laser equipment capable of projecting concentrated beams into the anomaly zone at precise frequencies Travis had calculated based on previous sensor data. The experiment was ambitious and potentially groundbreaking. If successful, it could provide the first reproducible method for triggering and studying the phenomena under controlled conditions rather than waiting for spontaneous occurrences. The setup took an entire day, with Travis personally overseeing the installation of laser arrays, sensor equipment, and recording devices positioned across the mesa to capture data from multiple angles simultaneously. Brandon invited additional scientific observers, including physicists and aerospace engineers, to witness the experiment and provide independent verification of results. The atmosphere was one of excitement and anticipation rather than concern. Nobody on the team believed they were doing anything particularly dangerous. They'd conducted dozens of experiments at the ranch without incident, and this seemed like just another data collection opportunity using more sophisticated equipment than previous investigations. The experiment was scheduled for early evening when atmospheric conditions were optimal and the setting sun wouldn't interfere with laser visibility. As the team assembled on the mesa and Travis began the activation sequence for the laser array, everyone felt confident this would be a routine scientific investigation that might yield interesting data. Within minutes, that confidence would be shattered as something responded to their laser emissions with immediate and violent hostility. The footage from that evening shows the exact moment when scientific curiosity crossed a boundary into genuine danger, triggering a response from whatever intelligence or phenomenon exists at Skinwalker Ranch that proved it could and would defend itself against perceived threats with physical force. Dr. Travis Taylor was operating the primary laser control station, making fine adjustments to beam frequency and intensity while monitoring real-time sensor feedback displayed on multiple laptop screens arrayed before him. The footage shows Travis focused intently on his work, calling out technical observations to the team about electromagnetic readings that were beginning to spike in ways consistent with his theoretical predictions. For approximately 8 minutes, the experiment proceeded exactly as planned. The lasers were projecting into the anomaly zone, sensors were collecting data, and cameras were recording everything from multiple angles for later analysis. Then something changed. Travis noticed a sudden surge in electromagnetic readings that exceeded anything the equipment was designed to measure, causing several sensors to overload and shut down automatically. He reached for the laser controls to reduce power output, concerned that the equipment was malfunctioning or that they were inadvertently creating a feedback loop. Before Travis could touch the controls, he was violently struck by an invisible force that witnesses describe as impossibly powerful. The camera footage captures the moment in disturbing clarity. Travis is standing normally one instant, then the next. He's thrown backwards several feet, as if hit by a massive unseen impact. His body leaves the ground entirely before crashing into equipment behind him with enough force to damage the metal cases and cause Travis to cry out in obvious pain. The entire incident occurs in less than 2 seconds, but the violence and power behind whatever struck him is undeniable on the footage. Team members rushed to Travis immediately, finding him dazed and struggling to breathe from what appeared to be blunt force trauma to his chest and abdomen.
abdomen. When they helped him to his feet and examined him, visible injuries were already forming, dark bruising across his torso in a pattern that suggested impact from a large focused force rather than falling against equipment edges. Travis insisted he hadn't tripped or lost his balance. Something had physically hit him with tremendous power from a direction where nothing visible existed on any camera angle. Brandon Fugel made the immediate decision to shut down the laser array and secure Travis' medical attention. But before the team could begin powering down equipment, the situation escalated dramatically as additional crew members came under attack. Eric Bard was positioned approximately 30 yards from Travis at a secondary monitoring station, collecting spectrographic data and observing atmospheric changes during the laser experiment. When Travis was attacked, Eric had immediately started moving toward him to provide assistance. But before he'd covered half the distance, he suddenly stopped, staggered, and collapsed to his knees, clutching his head and upper body. The footage shows Eric's collapse happening within seconds of Travis being struck, suggesting a coordinated assault on multiple team members rather than isolated incidents. Crew members who reached Eric first found him in severe distress. He was vomiting. His skin was flushed and hot to the touch, and he reported intense burning sensations across his exposed skin areas, including his face, neck, and hands. The symptoms were consistent with acute radiation exposure, which seemed impossible given that no radiation sources were present in the experiment beyond normal background levels. Eric was clearly in worse condition than Travis, unable to stand without support and exhibiting signs of shock, including rapid heartbeat, shallow breathing, and disorientation about where he was and what had happened. Brandon ordered immediate evacuation and called for emergency medical response, recognizing this had escalated beyond anything the team's first aid training could handle. While waiting for paramedics, team members noticed something disturbing. Eric's exposed skin areas were developing visible burns that appeared to be progressing in real time, starting as redness but darkening to second-degree burn appearance within minutes. Medical equipment the team had on site for monitoring crew health during investigations revealed elevated radiation readings on Eric's body and clothing that exceeded safe exposure limits. This was medically impossible. Radiation doesn't spontaneously appear on a person without a source, and there were no radioactive materials anywhere near the experiment site. When paramedics arrived and transported Eric to the hospital, emergency room physicians were baffled by his presentation. The burns, radiation readings, and systemic symptoms were consistent with significant radiation exposure, yet there was no logical source for such exposure. Eric's condition stabilized after several hours of treatment, but the medical mystery of how he'd been exposed to radiation in the middle of a Utah desert remained completely unexplained. The incident proved that whatever had attacked Travis hadn't stopped with a single victim. It had systematically targeted multiple team members with different forms of assault. Brandon Fugel stood on the mesa watching two of his team members injured and possibly dying, facing the most difficult decision of his tenure as Skinwalker Ranch owner. As a successful businessman accustomed to calculated risks and data-driven decisions, Brandon now confronted a situation where no amount of wealth, planning, or expertise could guarantee his team's safety against threats that defied scientific explanation. His first instinct was immediate evacuation, get everyone off the mesa, shut down all experiments, and regroup once injuries were assessed and medical professionals provided guidance. But the scientist part of Brandon recognized they were documenting something unprecedented. Whatever had attacked Travis and Eric had responded to their experiment in ways that proved intelligence, awareness, and capability for physical interaction with humans. This was exactly the kind of breakthrough evidence the ranch had been seeking for decades, and abandoning the investigation meant potentially losing data that could never be replicated. The ethical calculation was brutal. Continue collecting data while people were being injured, or prioritize immediate safety over scientific discovery. Brandon made calls to medical consultants describing Eric's symptoms, seeking guidance on whether they were dealing with a medical emergency requiring immediate hospital transport or something that could be managed on-site while securing equipment and data. The responses were alarming. Radiation exposure severe enough to cause visible burns and systemic symptoms required immediate professional medical intervention and potentially weeks of monitoring for delayed effects, including organ damage and immune system compromise. There was no ethical justification for keeping Eric on the mesa 1 second longer than necessary for safe transport. Travis, despite his own injuries and obvious pain, argued for continuing the experiment. He recognized the scientific importance of what they were documenting and believed they could implement safety protocols to protect remaining team members while collecting additional data. Brandon overruled him, making the definitive call to shut down all equipment and evacuate to the command center. But even that decision proved complicated when something began attacking from above, making evacuation itself dangerous. Brandon found himself coordinating a retreat under hostile conditions from an enemy he couldn't see, couldn't predict, and couldn't defend against using any conventional security measures. His background in real estate development and business management had prepared him for financial risks and complex negotiations, not tactical evacuation of personnel under assault from unexplained phenomena. As the team began shutting down equipment and preparing to evacuate the mesa, the attacks escalated in a way that suggested whatever they'd provoked was determined to prevent them from leaving, or perhaps to punish them for the laser experiment. Multiple crew members reported feeling impacts from above, not gentle touches or subjective sensations, but forceful strikes that knocked equipment from their hands and caused them to stumble or fall. The camera footage captures several incidents where objects and people appear to be struck by invisible forces from the empty sky above. One particularly dramatic sequence shows a heavy metal equipment case being lifted off the ground and thrown laterally across the mesa, traveling at least 15 feet before crashing down and breaking open. No wind, no visible force, just the case suddenly airborne and violently displaced. Physics alone made this impossible. The case weighed over 40 pounds and would require significant force applied at precise angles to achieve the trajectory captured on video. Crew members scrambled to secure equipment and themselves as the aerial assault continued. Sound equipment recorded bizarre audio during this period, deep rumbling sounds that seemed to come from directly overhead despite clear skies, high-pitched whining noises that hurt team members' ears and couldn't be isolated to any equipment source, and what several people described as a rhythmic pulsing that they felt physically in their chests, like standing near massive subwoofers at a concert. The coordinated nature of the attack suggested intelligence. Different crew members were being targeted with different types of assault simultaneously, as if something was observing their positions and choosing appropriate methods to harass or injure each person. Brandon's security personnel attempted to provide protection, but were helpless against threats they couldn't see or predict. One security officer was struck hard enough to knock his radio from his belt, the device skittering across the mesa as if kicked by an invisible foot. Another reported feeling hands pushing against his back, trying to force him toward the mesa's edge, though no one was near him, and footage confirmed he was isolated from other team members. The psychological terror of being under attack from unseen forces was as damaging as the physical impacts. Trained security professionals accustomed to assessing and responding to threats found themselves completely ineffective against an enemy that violated every assumption about how physical reality operates. While chaos unfolded on the mesa, Ranch Superintendent Thomas Winterton and Chief Security Officer Bryant Arnold were positioned at the ranch perimeter, monitoring access points and maintaining communication with the investigation team. Their experience that night proved the attacks weren't confined to the Mesa experiment site, but were happening simultaneously across different areas of the property. Thomas was conducting a routine perimeter check in his vehicle when he reported via radio that he was being followed by something he couldn't see, but could hear moving through brush parallel to the road. The sound was too large and too coordinated to be wildlife, and it maintained pace with his vehicle even as he accelerated. When Thomas stopped to investigate with spotlights, he saw nothing. But the moment he turned off his vehicle's lights, he heard what he described as footsteps approaching his position from multiple directions simultaneously, as if he was being surrounded. His radio transmission to Bryant captured genuine fear in his voice as he requested immediate backup. Bryant responded in his security vehicle but experienced catastrophic equipment failure en route. His radio cut out mid-transmission. His vehicle's electrical system began malfunctioning with lights flickering and engine sputtering, and his GPS navigation showed his location as somewhere over 100 miles away, despite being on ranch property he'd driven countless times. The equipment failures left Bryant stranded and unable to reach Thomas or communicate with the command center. Both men were effectively isolated in darkness on a property where something was demonstrating hostile intent toward the investigation team. The most terrifying aspect of their experience was the physical attacks they endured while separated and vulnerable. Thomas reported being shoved hard enough to stumble while standing outside his vehicle trying to restart his radio. He felt distinct pressure against his chest and shoulders, as if invisible hands were pushing him. And when he retreated into his vehicle and turned on interior lights, he discovered fresh scratches on his arms that were bleeding and stinging. Bryant had similar experiences. Objects in his vehicle were knocked from their positions. His rearview mirror was violently twisted sideways, and he felt repeated impacts against the vehicle's exterior as if something was striking the doors and hood with considerable force. The radio eventually came back online with Bryant and Thomas both reporting to Brandon that they were under attack and requesting permission to evacuate the property entirely. The physical evidence from the Skinwalker Ranch attacks provided undeniable proof that something had caused genuine harm to multiple team members, documented through medical records that would stand up to legal and scientific scrutiny. Eric Bard's hospital evaluation revealed radiation exposure levels that triggered mandatory reporting to federal authorities who monitor such incidents for public safety and national security purposes. His radiation readings measured at levels consistent with proximity to industrial radioactive sources or medical radiation equipment, yet no such sources existed anywhere near the ranch during the experiment. The burns on Eric's skin were classified as second-degree thermal and radiation burns, requiring specialized treatment including topical medications and monitoring for infection. Blood work showed elevated white blood cell counts and other markers consistent with the body's response to radiation damage, effects that typically take hours or days to appear but manifested in Eric within minutes of exposure. Medical professionals who treated Eric documented their findings with the caveat that the exposure source remained unknown and unexplained, unusual language in medical records that typically identify specific causes for injuries. Travis Taylor's injuries were equally well documented, though different in nature. X-rays revealed soft tissue trauma across his chest and abdomen consistent with blunt force impact from a large object striking him with significant velocity. The bruising patterns were photographed and measured, showing an impact zone approximately 12 inches in diameter, centered on his sternum and spreading across his ribs. Sports medicine specialists consulted about the injuries compared them to impacts seen in football players hit by tackles or martial artists struck during full contact sparring, the kind of damage that requires substantial force delivered by something solid. What made Travis's injuries medically puzzling was the absence of corresponding external trauma. When someone is hit hard enough to cause that level of internal bruising, there's typically skin abrasions, cuts, or surface damage from whatever struck them. Travis had none of that. His skin was intact except for the deep bruising, as if he'd been hit by something that could deliver tremendous force without surface friction or cutting edges. Thomas Winterton and Brian Arnold's scratches were examined by medical staff and photographed for documentation. The scratch patterns were analyzed and determined to be consistent with fingernail or claw marks rather than contact with equipment edges or vegetation. The injuries were fresh, appearing during the investigation period, and located on body areas that were covered by clothing when the men left the command center. Dr. Travis Taylor, despite his own injuries, immediately began analyzing the data collected during the attack, determined to find scientific explanations for what had happened to him and his team members. His preliminary analysis revealed electromagnetic anomalies that correlated precisely with the timing of each physical attack, suggesting a connection between energy phenomena and the violence experienced by the crew. During the 8 minutes of laser operation before Travis was struck, sensors detected a progressive buildup of electromagnetic energy in the anomaly zone at frequencies that matched the laser emissions, but at amplitudes exponentially higher than what the equipment was producing. Travis theorized they'd inadvertently created a resonance effect where the laser energy was being amplified by something in the atmosphere or space above the mesa, building to levels that triggered a defensive or retaliatory response from whatever generates the phenomena. The moment of Travis's attack corresponded exactly with a massive electromagnetic pulse detected by equipment positioned around the mesa. The pulse registered across multiple sensor types simultaneously. Magnetometers, RF spectrum analyzers, and electric field detectors all recorded spikes that exceeded their measurement capabilities by orders of magnitude. The pulse originated from a point in the anomaly zone directly above where Travis was standing and propagated outward in a focused beam rather than radiating equally in all directions. This directional characteristic suggested intentional targeting rather than random energy discharge. Eric Bard's radiation exposure remained the most scientifically puzzling aspect because radiation detectors positioned around the mesa showed no elevated readings in the environment, only on Eric's body and clothing after his collapse. Travis hypothesized that Eric had been exposed to a highly localized and brief burst of radiation, intense enough to cause damage, but short-lived enough to dissipate before environmental sensors could detect it. This would require technology or natural phenomena capable of generating and directing radiation with precision that exceeded any known human capability. The aerial assault phase showed even more interesting data. High-speed cameras captured frame-by-frame sequences of objects being displaced, and careful analysis revealed subtle atmospheric distortions at the moment of impact, like heat shimmer or gravitational lensing effects that indicated something was present even if not directly visible. Travis believed they were observing camouflaged or phase-shifted matter that could interact physically with normal matter, while remaining largely invisible to human perception and most sensor types. The violent attacks during the Mesa experiment fundamentally transformed how Brandon Fugel approaches investigations at Skinwalker Ranch, implementing safety protocols that acknowledge the genuine physical dangers posed by whatever phenomena exist on the property. The most immediate change was mandatory medical monitoring for all personnel during investigations. Team members now wear biosensors that continuously track heart rate, blood pressure, body temperature, and radiation exposure, with real-time data transmitted to medical personnel stationed at the command center who can order immediate evacuation if dangerous physiological changes are detected. Brandon invested in a mobile medical unit permanently stationed at the ranch, equipped with emergency treatment capabilities and staffed by paramedics trained in radiation exposure response, trauma care, and psychological crisis intervention. The unit includes equipment to measure and document radiation levels on individuals, allowing immediate assessment of exposure risks. All investigation plans now undergo safety review by an independent committee including physicians, radiation safety experts, and security professionals who assess potential risks and recommend protective measures before experiments are approved. High-risk investigations require written, informed consent from all participants acknowledging specific dangers and agreeing they understand experiments might trigger hostile responses from unknown phenomena. Brandon also implemented tactical withdrawal protocols, predetermined evacuation routes, rally points, and communication procedures for situations where investigations need to be abandoned quickly under potentially hostile conditions. Security personnel receive training in protecting team members from threats that may not be visible or predictable using conventional security methods. The psychological impact on team members has been significant and ongoing. Travis Taylor, despite being a trained scientist comfortable with uncertainty and unexplained phenomena, admits the experience changed his perspective on Skinwalker Ranch investigations. He's more cautious now about experiments that might be perceived as aggressive or threatening by whatever intelligence or phenomenon exists at the ranch, recognizing that their laser experiment may have crossed a boundary that provoked retaliation. Some crew members requested transfers to other projects after witnessing the attacks, unwilling to continue working at a location where they might be physically harmed by forces they can't understand or defend against. Brandon has made counseling resources available to all staff and doesn't pressure anyone to participate in investigations they're uncomfortable with.
Season 6 of The Secret of Skinwalker Ranch was supposed to deliver answers. Instead, it revealed something so disturbing that even Dr. Travis Taylor, a man of science, was left speechless. Beneath Utah's red earth, the team uncovered what appears to be a buried intelligence, something ancient, engineered, and very much alive. The ranch didn't just fight back, it warned them, "Stay tuned," as we break down the moment the mystery of Skinwalker Ranch was finally solved, and why that truth may be far more terrifying than anyone expected. Subscribe for more unexplained discoveries and real-world mysteries. It started like any other night at Skinwalker Ranch, cold, windless, and unnervingly still. Inside the command trailer, the hum of machinery filled the silence as the Luna Group's subsurface radar swept across the mesa. On the monitors, green lines flickered, translating the invisible depths below into tangible data. But something was wrong. The readings weren't random geological noise. They were organized. Each pulse of the radar came back with the same strange pattern, equidistant lines stacked in parallel, moving toward the center of the ranch like veins feeding a single heart. Dr. Travis Taylor leaned forward, his mirrored lenses reflecting the monitors as his expression hardened. "These aren't caves," he muttered, voice barely above a whisper. "Somebody built this." The others stared at him, waiting for a laugh that never came. The air seemed to thicken, the trailer's temperature dropping several degrees in seconds. Then, without warning, every monitor in the room flashed white. The sound cut out. For a full 3 seconds, there was only silence, before the entire system rebooted itself. When the radar came back online, the pattern had changed. The tunnels they had just mapped were gone. replaced by blank readings, as though the Earth itself had erased them. "What the hell?" murmured Eric Bard, tapping the keyboard. "We didn't lose signal. It just deleted itself." Then came the vibration. A deep, bone-rattling hum rolled through the floor like a heartbeat beneath their feet. Caleb Bentz looked around nervously. "It feels like the ground knows we're watching it," he said. Travis didn't respond. He just kept staring at the screen, eyes wide. He'd spent years chasing UFOs, energy bursts, and inexplicable phenomena. But this was different. This was intelligent behavior, a defense mechanism. The lights flickered again. Static crawled across the monitors, spelling out shapes that looked almost deliberate before vanishing entirely. In that moment, every man in the trailer understood. They hadn't just discovered something buried under the mesa. They had alerted it. Whatever slept beneath Skinwalker Ranch was now awake, aware, and reacting to their intrusion. And as Travis muttered quietly to himself, "Something down there doesn't want to be found." The next morning, under the thin Utah sunlight, the Luna Group doubled down. Jeremiah Pei, the young visionary behind their advanced radar technology, wasn't ready to back off. His team rolled out a series of subsurface scanners that used frequency stacking, a method so sensitive it could detect air pockets at the atomic level. "If something's down there," he said, "we'll see it." But even his voice carried unease. The men knew the ranch had a reputation for punishing curiosity. As the new equipment powered up, the command trailer hummed like a living thing. On the screen, the Earth unfolded in layers, strata, fault lines, and voids. But this time, what emerged wasn't geological chaos. It was geometry. Beneath the mesa ran a series of perfect straight corridors, evenly spaced, each one connecting to a larger central structure. "That's not erosion," Eric Bard whispered. "That's design." The realization hit hard. Nature doesn't build in right angles. Someone, or something, had carved these lines intentionally. As Jeremiah expanded the scan radius, the voids revealed a lattice, a network converging beneath three of the ranch's most infamous hotspots: the Triangle, the East Field, and the Mesa itself. The very places where cameras malfunctioned, compasses spun wildly, and UFOs appeared without warning. Travis Taylor stepped closer to the monitor. "These tunnels," he said quietly, "they're not random. They're laid out like a system, power lines or arteries. The more data streamed in, the clearer it became. Whatever was buried below was engineered for function, not chance." Then it happened again. The radar feed flickered. A pulse of interference hit the signal, sharp and rhythmic, like a heartbeat. "That's biological," Caleb muttered, half joking. But no one laughed. The instruments began vibrating violently, and a faint metallic tone rang through the trailer, rising in pitch until the windows rattled. Jeremiah shouted over the noise, "We're losing coherence!" before cutting the power entirely. When the silence returned, everyone could feel it, that eerie, heavy awareness in the air, like being watched from below. Travis broke the tension with a voice that sounded less like a scientist and more like a man who'd glimpsed something he wished he hadn't. "This isn't geology," he said, shaking his head. "It's surveillance." And as the team exchanged uneasy glances, a chilling thought settled in. Maybe they weren't mapping the mesa at all. Maybe the mesa was mapping them. By the third night, the air around Skinwalker Ranch felt electric. Static clung to every surface, and even the ground seemed to hum with a low mechanical vibration. Inside the command trailer, the Luna Group ran a synchronized deep scan, layering thermal, magnetic, and radar imagery in one sweep. If the mesa had secrets, this was the night they'd finally be exposed. The first few passes came back normal. Soil density, mineral veins, fractured bedrock. But then, the screen shifted. A cluster of shapes began forming beneath the center of the triangle. At first, it looked like an error, a blur of overlapping frequencies. But as Jeremiah's team stabilized the signal, the blur resolved into structure. The readings showed a massive hollow void, perfectly symmetrical, buried more than 400 feet below the surface. Its walls were smooth, its boundaries precise, a chamber so large and mathematically clean it couldn't have been formed by any natural process known to geology. The room fell silent except for the low hum of the monitors. Travis Taylor adjusted his glasses, staring at the data. "That's not natural," he said flatly. "That's built." His voice cracked slightly at the last word. When they rotated the imaging, the true scale came into view. The chamber spanned nearly the length of a football field, with angular corridors connecting it to the same lattice of tunnels they'd discovered earlier. One of those tunnels ran directly beneath the metallic anomaly that had destroyed their drills years ago. The same spot where Thomas Winterton had suffered that inexplicable skull swelling. The pieces were starting to align in ways that defied reason. Brandon Fugel, usually calm and analytical, stepped closer to the screen, his face pale. "You're saying there's a structure," he said quietly, "a facility under my property?" Before anyone could respond, the screens flickered again. The chamber's image distorted, then pulsed with a faint blue glow, like light bouncing off metal deep underground. The equipment began to whine. Eric Bard shouted that the sensors were spiking beyond safe levels. Then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the image was gone. The entire feed wiped clean, replaced by flat static. Travis exhaled slowly, his tone darker than before. "It's active," he said. "Whatever's down there, it's aware we found it." And as the hum faded and the monitors went black, the team realized something horrifying. This wasn't just a discovery, it was a reaction. Something deep beneath the mesa was responding to them, like a living organism defending its own body. The next morning, Skinwalker Ranch didn't just feel hostile, it felt alive. The usual desert quiet had been replaced by a thick, heavy stillness that made every breath feel monitored. Even the wind seemed to stop at the mesa's edge, as if obeying invisible boundaries. Brandon Fugel described it best. "It's like the air itself is listening." Inside the command trailer, chaos was brewing. The Luna Group had barely recovered from the previous night's system crash when new interference began to crawl through their instruments. Monitors flickered with phantom readings, timestamps looped backward, and GPS units started displaying coordinates that didn't exist on any map. Jeremiah Pay slammed his keyboard in frustration. "It's like it's rewriting our data in real time," he said. "Something's hijacking the signal." Eric Bard's voice cut through the confusion. "Check the EM readings." Travis Taylor bent over the console. His mirrored lenses reflected a growing spike on the screen. The energy was off the charts, emanating from the same coordinates where the radar had detected the underground chamber. "It's not just interference," Travis muttered. "It's a response." Then came the physical reaction. Every device inside the trailer, phones, tablets, even watches, began vibrating in unison. Loose metal objects hummed and trembled. A low-frequency tone filled the air, resonating through their bones. Thomas Winterton staggered, clutching his head. "It's the same pressure," he gasped. "The same one from before." Before anyone could move, the lights dimmed, and the entire trailer shuddered as if struck by an invisible wave. The temperature plunged in seconds, their breath now visible in the cold. Outside, motion sensors erupted. The monitors flashed with silhouettes, humanoid outlines pacing along the ridge, each one fading the instant a flashlight turned their way. Caleb froze. "We're being watched," he whispered. Travis didn't disagree. "No," he said, voice low and certain. "We're being warned." When power finally stabilized, every camera that had faced the mesa was dead. No footage, no signal, just static. It was as if the land itself had reached up and deleted the evidence. That night, the team realized they weren't alone on Skinwalker Ranch. Whatever intelligence was buried beneath them, or perhaps within the land itself, had drawn its line in the sand, and it was making one thing painfully clear. There would be consequences for going any deeper. By daybreak, fear had hardened into determination. Brandon Fugel wasn't ready to retreat, not after coming this far. He authorized the next phase, a full-scale DART aerial sweep, using deep atmospheric radiotomography to map what traditional radar could not. The device was mounted beneath a helicopter, designed to scan both ground and sky, to pierce whatever invisible barrier the ranch seemed to generate. The operation began under a storm-gray horizon. From the command trailer, the Luna Group monitored the chopper's feed in real time. The data started smooth: electromagnetic density, moisture levels, air ionization. Then, Within seconds of passing over the triangle, the feed snapped to static. Every line of data flatlined. It wasn't noise, distortion, or weather. It was absence. A void that swallowed the signal whole. The pilot's voice cracked over the radio. "I've lost my compass. Controls feel heavy. We're being pulled." The entire room went cold. On the monitors, the helicopter's lights flickered and bent, shimmering as if passing through liquid. To the naked eye, it appeared to blur in and out of existence. One moment solid, the next ghost-like, distorted by some unseen distortion in the air. "Pull back!" Travis Taylor barked, gripping the comm. The pilot tried, but the craft didn't respond immediately. Alarms blared, and the DART unit beneath the fuselage began to overheat, red lights flashing across every screen. Eric Bard shouted the temperature readings, 80 degrees Celsius and climbing, even though the helicopter was flying through freezing desert air. Then the pilot's voice came again, strained and shaking. "There's something pacing us. It's right beside us." From the ground, the team could see it, a shadow, darker than the clouds, matching the chopper's movements perfectly. It wasn't visible on infrared. It wasn't a reflection. It was following. Then, just as the helicopter cleared the ridge, the signal reappeared, clean, crisp, and perfectly normal, as if nothing had happened. The pilot landed hard, stepping out pale and trembling. "It felt like we flew through a wall," he muttered. Inside the command trailer, Travis stared at the recovered data in silence. The readings showed something beyond comprehension. A vertical column of distortion stretching straight up from the mesa into the sky. A perfect cylinder of electromagnetic interference extending miles high, like an invisible tower connecting Earth to somewhere above. He looked at Brandon and said the words no one wanted to hear. "That's not nature. That's design." Whatever was hiding beneath Skinwalker Ranch wasn't just underground. It reached into the air, surrounding them in a cage of unseen energy. The team hadn't just discovered a barrier, they'd flown straight into it. After the chaos in the air, the team made one collective decision. If the sky was off limits, they'd go underneath. Travis Taylor authorized a deep Earth probe deployment into the heart of the anomaly, near the exact coordinates where the DART system had collapsed. The device, equipped with reinforced casing and heat-resistant sensors, was designed to transmit even under electromagnetic duress. But everyone in the trailer knew the risk. The last time they drilled here, the ground had fought back. The operation began in silence. The hum of the drill was low and steady, the data stream clear. Eric Bard called out the readings as they came in. Sediment, clay, fractured rock layer, depth 120 feet. Then the feed froze for a fraction of a second before correcting itself. A flicker that sent a wave of unease through the crew. Jeremiah frowned. "That wasn't lag," he said. "It's like something down there edited the signal." At 200 feet, the data spiked. The probe's magnetometer readings climbed past safe levels, and the temperature began to surge unnaturally. 10, 15, 20 degrees above ambient in under a minute. Then, the camera feed distorted, its view twisting into a haze of static and heat bloom. Through the blur, something metallic glimmered, a smooth, curved surface embedded deep in the rock, reflecting light like liquid steel. "That's it," Travis said, leaning closer. "That's the same signature we hit years ago. The chamber, the anomaly, the buried structure that refused to be breached." He ordered the team to stop drilling, but before the signal could be cut, the probe's temperature shot up past 90 degrees Celsius. Every alarm in the trailer screamed at once. Eric lunged for the kill switch, but the feed had already gone black. Then, without warning, the ground moved. A tremor rippled through the mesa, knocking tools from tables. Outside, dust rose in thin spirals as if drawn upward by invisible pressure. The team stumbled out of the trailer just in time to see a burst of blue light erupt from the drill site, a glowing sphere, silent and perfect, hovering 6 feet off the ground. It pulsed once, twice, then shot straight into the sky, vanishing without sound. No one spoke for nearly a minute. The smell of ozone hung in the air. The instruments were fried, not damaged, but erased. Every log, every data stream, gone. Travis finally broke the silence, his voice low, heavy with understanding. "That wasn't a malfunction," he said. "That was a response. Whatever was buried beneath the mesa wasn't dormant, it was alive. And now, It knew they were trying to reach it. The probe's destruction had crossed a line. The evidence was undeniable now. Skinwalker Ranch wasn't reacting by accident. It was responding with precision. Brandon Fugel wanted answers, but for the first time, even his confidence seemed to waver. If that light was a defense mechanism, he muttered, then we're not just studying the phenomenon, we're provoking it. Travis Taylor gathered the team inside the command trailer. The air felt heavy, the silence punctuated by the faint hum of fried equipment still cooling on the table. On the main screen, Eric Bard replayed the final moments before the probe went offline, frame by frame, pixel by pixel. Between the flashes of static, they could see it, a faint outline, spherical and perfectly symmetrical, embedded in the earth. It wasn't a rock formation. It wasn't metal debris. It was shaped like a machine. Jeremiah Pay enhanced the contrast, overlaying readings from the magnetic field data. The image sharpened, revealing a honeycomb-like pattern across the surface. Hexagonal grooves, too uniform to be natural. "It's manufactured," he said. "And it's massive." The room fell silent. The team's working theory turned darker with every revelation. If the tunnels they had mapped were deliberate and the structure beneath was constructed, then the ranch itself was part of something ancient, perhaps something still operational. Thomas Winterton broke the silence. "So, we're basically living on top of what? A reactor?" Travis shook his head. "Not a reactor," he said grimly. "A system." He zoomed in on the data streams they'd recovered before the blackout. These electromagnetic bursts aren't random. They're patterned, timed, like a heartbeat. The realization hit everyone at once. The ranch wasn't just guarding something. It was something, a living, intelligent mechanism disguised as landscape. Before anyone could speak, the trailer lights dimmed again. The EM meters spiked on their own, and the air thickened, vibrating with a deep resonance. Cameras outside flickered, showing static silhouettes darting between the mesas. Tall, distorted figures. Humanoid, but wrong in proportion. For a moment, one paused near the fence line, head tilted, staring directly toward the trailer. Caleb whispered, "It's watching us." Travis didn't flinch. "No," he said, eyes locked on the monitors. "It's studying us, the same way we've been studying it." The thought settled like a weight over the room. Skinwalker Ranch was no longer a mystery they were trying to solve. It was a sentient system, ancient, engineered, and awake. And as of that night, it had finally turned its gaze back on them. By dawn, no one slept. The team had gathered under the flickering lights of the command trailer, surrounded by screens that refused to stay stable. What little data they'd salvaged painted a horrifying picture. The underground tunnels weren't random. They formed a precise geometric alignment beneath the mesa, connected by nodes that pulsed in measured intervals. The pattern mirrored something that shouldn't exist underground. A constellation. When mapped out, it aligned perfectly with the stars of Orion's belt. Eric Bard stared at the projection, his voice trembling. "This isn't construction. It's calibration." Travis adjusted his glasses, eyes fixed on the pulsating lines. "You're saying it's astronomical?" he asked. "No," Eric replied. "I'm saying it's a machine synchronized to the sky." The realization sent chills through the room. The tunnels, the energy pulses, the electromagnetic storms, they were all part of a larger mechanism. A mechanism that connected the Earth to the stars above, like an ancient relay still active after centuries. The blue orbs, the radiation spikes, the interference, none of it was random. It was all a byproduct of something operating beneath them. Then came the final confirmation. When the Luna Group's satellite data synced with the ranch's local readings, the resulting overlay revealed something impossible. The energy signature of the mesa rose in vertical columns, creating a funnel-shaped distortion reaching high into the stratosphere. The ranch wasn't just a hotspot, it was a gateway. Travis Taylor broke the silence. "Every time we dig, every time we scan, it reacts because we're triggering it. It's not passive, it's protecting something." Brandon leaned forward, his tone grave. "Protecting what, exactly?" Travis didn't look away from the monitors. "Maybe not what? Maybe where?" The words landed like thunder. The team wasn't investigating a mystery. They were trespassing on a boundary between worlds. As the sun set over the red horizon, The instruments went silent again. The mesa pulsed once more, faint but deliberate, as though exhaling after being disturbed. For the first time since their arrival, no one spoke. The data was undeniable. Skinwalker Ranch was not a place of random phenomena. It was a designed system, intelligent, aware, and reactive. And if the team was right, they hadn't uncovered the heart of the mystery. They'd only grazed the surface of something vast, something ancient that had been watching long before humans ever set foot in Utah's desert. Travis turned off the final monitor, his reflection flickering in the black screen. "We came here to find the truth," he said quietly, but maybe the truth was never meant to be found. Outside, the mesa rumbled one last time, a low, resonant hum, as if answering back. Then, silence. In the quiet hours before dawn, the team at Skinwalker Ranch uncovered something no one was prepared for: a hidden underground tunnel system sealed beneath decades of Earth. It wasn't on any map, it wasn't in any records, and the moment they opened it, every piece of equipment malfunctioned at once, as if something inside didn't want to be found. What they discovered down there, the symbols, the footprints, the metallic chamber, changed everything. Before we begin, subscribe, because this story only gets stranger from here. The breakthrough came by complete accident. The team wasn't digging for tunnels, they were simply tracing an electrical anomaly near the East Mesa, trying to understand why their sensors kept detecting a low-frequency pulse below the ground. It wasn't the kind of interference that comes from pipes or buried cable. This was rhythmic, intentional, almost like a heartbeat beneath the soil. When the readings spiked into the red, Travis asked Thomas to bring in the ground-penetrating radar. What showed up on the screen didn't make sense. A perfect horizontal void, 12 feet tall, nearly 40 feet long, with straight edges and a consistent depth. Natural caves never formed like that. This was engineered, built, and buried on purpose. The strangest part? The cavity was cold. Not just cooler than the surrounding soil, but unnaturally cold, as if something was drawing the heat out of the earth itself. They marked the area, brought in the excavator, and began peeling back the top layers of dirt. The deeper they got, the more uneasy everyone felt. Even Eric, who rarely reacted to anything, mentioned that the EM spikes were behaving like they were aware of us. At one point, the excavator bucket hit something solid, and the metal teeth screeched so violently that half the team dropped their equipment and covered their ears. When the dust settled, a massive slab revealed itself, smooth, blackened stone, cut with laser-like precision. No tool marks, no erosion, just a seamless door-like surface that definitely didn't belong underground. Caleb tapped it with a pry bar, but the sound it produced wasn't hollow or metallic. It was something else, something deeper. That was when the air changed. A wave of static rolled over them, strong enough to raise goosebumps on every arm. The radio crackled with a burst of whispers. Not words, not language, just layered voices overlapping like an echo from another room. Thomas pulled his headset off and whispered, "Something's behind that wall." And for the first time all morning, Travis didn't argue. He didn't second guess. He just stared at the stone surface, jaw set, eyes locked, as if finally realizing they had uncovered something the ranch had been hiding for decades, maybe even centuries. Something built with purpose, something sealed for a reason. The team approached the slab with the same caution they used when dealing with high radiation hotspots on the ranch. Cameras were positioned, radiation counters calibrated, and a remote prize system was brought in so no one would have to stand directly in front of whatever this thing actually was. But even with all the precautions, no one expected the moment the slab finally shifted. As the hydraulic press pushed against the stone, the ground vibrated in a low, rolling pulse, almost like the ranch itself was reacting. The slab didn't break, it didn't crumble, it simply slid, as if something on the other side released its grip. Dust poured out in a thick cloud, and a cold draft pushed across the team. Not a normal cold, not earth cold. This was the kind that felt like it came from somewhere sealed off from the world for too long. The opening revealed a descending staircase carved into the soil itself, but the cuts were too clean, too geometric. Each step was exactly the same height. Each edge was sharp as though it had been cut yesterday. The walls were reinforced with an unknown material, not stone, not metal, something in between, and every flashlight beam that hit it reflected strangely, almost bending the light instead of bouncing it. Travis took a few steps forward but froze. His tablet, which had been collecting readings the entire time, suddenly dropped to 0 across the board. Temperature, EM spikes, environmental data, everything flatlined. Then the device rebooted on its own, flashing an error message he'd never seen before. Input exceeds parameter. It was as though the sensors weren't malfunctioning. They were being overwhelmed. Eric radioed down to the command post for backup, but all he got was static layered with faint tapping, rhythmic like a coded message. 1, 2, pause. 1, 2, 3, pause. 1, 2. Caleb tried his headset next. Same tapping, same pattern. The team exchanged looks, the kind they only give each other when something is truly wrong. But despite the tension, despite the unnatural cold and the overpowering silence coming from the tunnel below, Thomas insisted they continue. "We opened it," he said. "Now we need to know what's inside." Reluctantly, Eric set up the first ground probe and lowered it into the darkness. The camera flickered, then stabilized, revealing a long, sloping corridor that seemed to stretch beyond the probe's range. The walls were marked with strange patterns, not writing, not symbols, more like impression, as if something with claws had scraped along the surface while moving deeper underground. Then the feed glitched. For a split second, the image warped, and a tall shadow appeared at the far end of the corridor, motionless, impossibly still, and not shaped like anything they recognized. Travis pulled the probe back immediately. Whatever was down there, it wasn't alone. Once the shadow appeared on the probe feed, the team took a full 10 minutes to regroup. Even Travis, usually the first to push forward, stood with his arms crossed, reviewing the footage frame by frame, but the shadow didn't behave like a living person, or even an animal. It didn't sway, breathe, or shift weight. It stayed perfectly still, as though it were part of the tunnel itself, or waiting. But they had come too far to turn back. If this tunnel system was intentionally buried, if it had been sealed with a precision-cut slab that reacted to their equipment, then the only way to understand Skinwalker Ranch was to go deeper. They entered in pairs. Thomas and Caleb went first, both armed with thermal scanners and shoulder cameras. Travis and Eric followed behind, each recording environmental data, magnetic field fluctuations, atmospheric ionization, radiation spikes, anything that might explain what they'd seen. The moment they stepped onto the first carved stair, the temperature plummeted, their breath fogged instantly, and their lights dimmed, not from battery drain, but as if the darkness itself was absorbing the beams. Travis whispered for everyone to keep calm and stick close. The walls emitted a faint hum, a subaudible frequency they couldn't place, but could feel in their bones. 30 feet down, the tunnel widened into a narrow corridor. The markings they saw on the probe feed were far clearer up close. Deep gouges running parallel, vertical scratches spaced perfectly apart, and strange grooves, as though something had been dragged through the passageway. Eric crouched, running a gloved finger over one of the grooves. "This wasn't carved with tools," he said. "This is biological." Before anyone could respond, the radio crackled. Only this time it wasn't tapping, it was breathing. Slow, raspy, rhythmic breathing echoing through the headsets, even though the radios weren't transmitting. Caleb yanked his earpiece out, eyes wide, but the sound didn't stop. It was coming from the tunnel itself. Then the ground trembled. Just a subtle shift, like something massive had moved deep below them. Dust drifted from the ceiling, and the hum in the walls grew louder, almost resonant, like a tuning fork struck by an unseen force. Thomas pointed forward with his flashlight, focusing on the end of the corridor ahead, where the probe had caught the shadow earlier. There was nothing there now. The corridor was empty, but the air felt wrong, heavier, thicker, like something enormous had just slipped out of sight. Suddenly, the thermal scanner in Travis's hand flashed a warning. Massive heat signature detected. But when he pointed the device down the corridor, the temperature readings didn't show a creature or a person. They showed a handprint, a human-shaped handprint freshly pressed into the wall, still radiating heat, despite the tunnel being cold as ice. And the hand was nearly twice the size of a man's. The team followed the massive handprint deeper into the corridor, each step echoing like they were walking through the ribcage of something ancient. The walls narrowed, then abruptly opened into a large domed chamber, far bigger than anything the probe footage had hinted at. Their flashlights revealed smooth, curved surfaces that formed a perfect hemisphere, almost like the inside of a metallic egg. It looked engineered, intentional, and completely out of place beneath Utah soil. But what stopped all four men cold wasn't the size of the chamber. It was the light. At the center of the dome, hovering inches above the floor, was a pale, pulsing glow. Not bright, but alive. It swirled like a tiny vortex wrapped in thin mist, emitting a faint crackling sound, reminiscent of electricity climbing up a copper wire. The glow wasn't attached to anything. No wires, no mechanical supports, simply floated, suspended in midair, as though gravity no longer applied. Thomas whispered, "This is impossible." Travis didn't answer. His face was locked in a stare of pure calculation, like he was trying to rewire the laws of physics in his mind just to make sense of it. Then the readings spiked, all of them. Radiation counters surged. Geiger meters chirped erratically. Magnetic sensors looped from 0 to maximum and back again. Even their watches, digital and analog, froze at the exact same second. Eric took a cautious step closer, his camera trembling in his hands. The light, it's reacting to us. And he was right. Every time one of them moved, the swirling glow shifted, subtle at first, then more aggressively, like it was tracking their presence. It never expanded, never shrank, but it pulsed harder, as though whatever intelligence controlled it had suddenly become aware. Caleb's voice cracked as he whispered, "This looks like the portal footage, but real." The temperature dropped again, fast. The air grew so cold it stabbed their lungs when they breathed. Frost began forming on the chamber floor. A thin layer of ice traced over the metallic walls. Their breath came out in thick clouds. Even their clothing stiffened from the frozen moisture. Then the hum returned, this time louder, this time directional. It vibrated the chamber walls, rising from the floor like a sound born from the Earth's deepest caverns. Their radios exploded with noise, not static this time, but layered whispers rushing outward like 1,000 voices pressed through a narrow gap. The swirling glow flared, once briefly revealing something inside it, a shape, long, thin, moving. And the moment it shifted, the chamber lights died, their flashlights flickered, and the pulsing glow collapsed inward, like a heartbeat stopping mid-beat. For a single second, the entire dome fell into pitch-black silence. Then something scratched the wall behind them. The scratching wasn't loud, just a slow, deliberate drag across the metallic wall behind them. But in the sudden darkness, it sounded like the entire chamber was being carved open. All four men froze. Their flashlights refused to power on, glitching like the batteries had been ripped out. The only light came from their equipment screens, flickering with corrupted static. Someone whispered, "Who's there?" No answer. Only a second scrape, this time closer. Caleb lifted his thermal camera, and for the first time since they'd entered the tunnel system, he regretted bringing it. The screen displayed a patch of brilliant white heat, shaped vaguely like a human figure standing motionless against the chamber wall. But the shape was wrong. The limbs were too long, the torso too narrow, and the head was elongated, almost cone-like, tapering to a point at the top. "Travis," Caleb whispered, voice shaking. "Something's in here with us." The figure didn't move, didn't breathe, didn't blink. It just stood, as if waiting. Thomas reached for his sidearm, a reflex, though everyone knew a pistol wasn't going to do much inside a place like this. The temperature plummeted again, hitting levels that made their hands go numb in seconds. Their breath fogged the space around them, drifting like vapor from a frozen lake. Then, just as Travis leaned forward to speak, the thermal figure vanished. One frame, it was there. The next, gone. Eric spun around, scanning the chamber. Thermal doesn't do that. Things don't just disappear. They lose heat gradually. He stopped because something else replaced it. Across the dome, the pulsing light that had collapsed seconds earlier began to regrow. Not into a floating glow this time, but into a pattern. Thin, bright lines spread across the metallic floor like circuitry illuminating beneath ice. The pattern formed arcs, then symbol, then something resembling a circular diagram carved in pure white light. It wasn't random. It wasn't natural. It looked designed. Travis approached cautiously, recording every detail. "This is responding to us," he muttered. "It's reading us, or scanning us." Suddenly, the entire chamber lit up with a blinding flash. The symbols surged outward, illuminating the walls. A circular opening, one that hadn't existed before, slid open in the metallic dome with a low mechanical groan, revealing a descending stairway carved into the earth. Caleb's voice trembled as he said what all of them were thinking. "This place, it goes deeper." And from somewhere below, far, far down the newly opened passageway, came a low, rhythmic thumping, slow, heavy, measured, like footsteps, coming up. The team stood at the top of the newly opened stairway, their lights trembling in their hands. The air drifting up from below felt different, denser, older, almost metallic, like breathing inside a sealed vault that hadn't been opened in centuries. Eric swallowed hard. "We shouldn't go down there," he whispered. But no one moved. No one argued either. Travis finally stepped forward, the weight of responsibility etched across his face. "If this thing opened when we approached, it's not random. It's responding. And if we leave now, we may never get another chance." His voice was steady, but his fingers were shaking. They descended slowly. Every step echoed into the darkness, each footfall repeating itself 2, sometimes 3 times, as if something below was mimicking them. The walls shifted from rough stone to smooth metal so polished it reflected their lights like a black mirror. Halfway down, the radio on Eric's belt crackled. Once, sharply. Then a voice whispered through, "Turn back." It wasn't any of their voices. Not distorted, not mechanical. It sounded human and terrified. They froze. The signal died instantly, replaced by a thick silence that pressed against their ears. Caleb checked the radio's frequency. Still on the team's private channel, impossible. At the bottom of the steps, the tunnel expanded into another chamber, smaller but colder, lined with curved walls covered in the same glowing symbols they'd seen above, except these were shifting, rearranging themselves every few seconds like a living language. "Are we inside some kind of machine?" Thomas whispered. Nobody answered, because in the center of the chamber stood a pedestal made of dark alloy, pulsing faintly like a heartbeat, and resting on top of it, half buried in dust, was an object the size of a football, shaped like a geometric seed with interlocking plates. As they approached, the plates shifted slightly, releasing a soft exhale of cold air. It was waking up. The chamber grew colder the moment Travis reached toward the metallic object. Everyone's breath fogged the air, drifting upward in thin white strands that vanished before they touched the ceiling. Caleb stepped forward instinctively, but Travis raised a hand to stop him. "No one touches anything yet," he said, though even he sounded unsure. The object pulsed again, slow, rhythmic, almost like it was syncing with the heartbeat of the room. Thin lines of light rippled beneath its interlocking plates, running in precise patterns that none of them recognized. Thomas whispered, "It looks like it's listening." Then something happened that none of them expected. As soon as Travis's flashlight beam swept across its surface, the object reacted. The plates shifted, unlocking slightly with a faint clicking sequence, each click echoing down the tunnel like a coded message. Everyone stumbled back. A narrow slit opened along its center, no wider than a pencil line, but a beam of blue-white light shot upward from it, carving a perfect column into the air. Within that beam, Symbols flickered rapidly, rotating and morphing like data being streamed in real time. Eric gasped. "It's projecting information!" But before Travis could analyze it, the entire chamber shuddered. Dust rained from above. The glowing wall symbols brightened, and the air filled with a low-frequency vibration that rattled their bones. The beam of light shifted direction, aiming itself deeper into the tunnel system, as if pointing the team toward something even larger, something the object was connected to. Then the pedestal beneath it emitted a low metallic groan. The plates of the object locked again, hard, sealing the slit shut with a final click. Whatever message it was trying to send, it wasn't finished. The moment the object sealed shut, the tunnel fell into an unnerving stillness, so complete that even the hum of distant machinery seemed to vanish. Travis steadied himself and aimed his flashlight in the direction the beam had pointed. The light hit a narrow passage branching off from the chamber, one none of them had mapped before. The walls here were different, smoother, darker, and lined with faint etchings that looked etched, not by tools, but by heat. Eric swallowed hard. This wasn't carved, it was melted. They moved forward cautiously, each step echoing in long metallic waves. The deeper they went, the more the air changed. It grew warmer, heavier, almost electrically charged. Soon the tunnel opened into a vast circular chamber, larger than anything they expected beneath the ranch. In the center sat a collapsed structure, part metallic, part stone, shaped like a dome that had been crushed inward from above. Caleb whispered, "Something fell on it?" But Travis shook his head. The impact didn't come from above. The pattern of destruction pointed outward, like something burst out from the inside. Around the dome lay fragments identical to the object they found earlier, but older, scorched, and warped, as if exposed to extreme heat or energy. Some pieces pulsed faintly when they approached, reacting to their presence. Others emitted a soft clicking sound, eerily similar to the heartbeat-like pulses they heard earlier. Then they found the final piece, the one that explained everything. Etched onto a large, partially intact wall plate was a diagram, not written in any known language, but in symbols matching those the object had projected earlier. Travis analyzed the shapes, following the lines connecting clusters of symbols. His expression shifted from fascination to dread. "It's a containment schematic," he said quietly. "This whole tunnel system was built to hold something, not store it, restrain it." Before the others could respond, a deep vibration rolled beneath their feet, different from earlier. This one wasn't mechanical. It was rhythmic, alive. Silence fell among the team as tiny particles of dust drifted from the unseen darkness overhead. Then, from somewhere deep within the collapsed dome, a faint metallic scrape echoed, slow, dragging, deliberate. Something had survived. Something was still moving. Travis snapped his head toward the tunnel they'd come from. "We leave, now!" They didn't argue. The team backed away, flashlights trembling as the scraping grew louder, closer, almost curious. They rushed into the main corridor just as a low-frequency roar, so deep it hit them in the chest, rolled through the chamber they had just vacated. When they reached the surface, everyone looked shaken, breathless, changed. Travis didn't say a word. He simply locked the entrance, welded the gate, and ordered the tunnel sealed permanently. Later that night, long after the crew left the ranch, Eric returned to his monitoring station. A single sensor, placed near the tunnel's deepest point, lit up on his screen. Not motion, not heat, a pulse. Slow, steady, growing stronger.